Hello, I'm Nigel Nelcon, Global Head of Tax Business Services for BNP Paribas Securities Services, and it's my pleasure to warmly welcome you to our client webinar on the Spanish Financial Transactions Tax, or Spanish FTT for short. The Spanish FTT is the latest in a series of financial transaction tax regimes to be introduced by individual European countries following the continuing struggle by some EU member states to get an EU-wide or at least multi-jurisdictional FTT in place. With similarities in particular to the French FTT, some of what has been put in place by and lessons learnt by organisations already can be reused. However, we've had a lot of interest from clients on the Spanish FTT topic, and as well as the specifics of the Spanish FTT regime that you'll hear about shortly, two key points to take note of. Firstly, although the Spanish FTT had been under discussion for some time, there is a very short implementation period with a go-live date of 16th of January next year. Secondly, the FTT law has not yet been finally published, and it's possible that documentation could change, so it's important that we are all flexible in our approach. Anyway, enough from me on the topic, as you're here, of course, to receive the wise words of BNP Paribas experts in Spain who have been closely following the Spanish FTT and its implications for ourselves and our clients. Our first speaker is Maria Villanueva, who is Head of Tax in Spain. Amongst many responsibilities, Maria provides specialist tax expertise to our operational and functional teams on the implementation of new regulation, such as the Spanish FTT. Our second speaker is James Foster. James is a sales market specialist, primarily responsible for sales and relationship management for non-Spanish resident banks and broker-dealers. Our third speaker is Sergio Gomez. As Head of Clearing, Settlement and Custody Product Management, Sergio is in charge of the development of products and services for clients and responsible for clearing, settlement and custody solutions. At the end of this presentation, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A, and I'd very much encourage you to make use of this. Just before I hand over to our first speaker, one important housekeeping point, and that is simply that everything presented in this webinar is, of course, not tax advice, and we would very much encourage clients to discuss the specific impact of the Spanish FTT for them with their tax advisors. And with that, I hand over to our first speaker, Maria.
Thank you, Nigel. Before going through the practical aspects of the Spanish FTT, we would like to give you a brief picture of the main features of the FTT regulation with slide number 3. We will start with the taxable event definition, which is the purchase of shares of Spanish-listed companies whose market capitalization exceeds of 1 billion euros on 1st December of the year prior to the fiscal year in which their purchase is executed. This is independently of the regulated market where the shares are traded, can be the Spanish market or any other regulated market located in the European Union or in a third country. This is because the principle of taxation is the place of issue and not that of residence. Therefore, shares of Spanish companies are taxed regardless of the country of residence of the financial intermediary which may intervene in the transaction, and independently, of course, where the transaction takes place due to the market where the shares are traded. The Spanish tax authorities will publish an indicative list on their portal every December identifying the items of the Spanish companies whose shares are taxable. This will help for the investors to have a clear view. For 2021 reporting, they will publish it by 16 December. We have to mention here also ADRs, which are considered the shares for the Spanish FTT. ADR, American Depositary Receipts, are negotiable certificates issued by a U.S. bank representing a specified number of shares of a foreign company's stock. We have to mention the tax rate, which is 20 basic points for 2021. The main questions that arise are, Firstly, who must bear or pay the tax? And secondly, who must collect and transfer the tax to the tax authority? The answer to the first question is, of course, the acquirer of the shares. Therefore, the acquirer will be defined as the taxable person for SPV. To answer to the second question, we have to refer to the taxpayer definition as is given by the law. The taxpayer is the obliged entity to charge the tax to the taxable person, collect it, and transfer and pay to the tax authorities, and also to prepare the reporting for its sending to the tax authorities. The taxpayer will be jointly responsible on this with the taxable person. This is why it's crucial to identify who is who. We have to remark that this obligation must be complied with by the taxpayers, irrespective of their locations, meaning that the foreign taxpayers are under the same obligations as the Spanish taxpayers. In order to make this process easier, the tax authorities have drafted a procedure for payment and reporting through the Spanish Central Depository, Iberclear. We will talk later about this more deeply. In the following part, James will give you additional details that will help to identify when an entity is acting as taxpayer based on the role played in respect to the acquisition. It is very important to pay attention to this part in order to identify your position. The following relevant concept is taxable transaction, which means any acquisition of shares which may imply a transfer of ownership. These transactions can be generated by a sample acquisition or by means of an exchange of financial instruments, such as derivatives, the conversion of a debt instrument, or the execution of corporate actions. All of them may imply the delivery of shares. In the following point, we refer to the exemptions that can be classified under four main categories related to primary markets. The second category is related to the correct functioning of secondary markets. There's a third category related to market-making activities. And there are other general exemptions that can be classified as other general exemptions. Let's continue with the tax-based definition, which comprises the consideration in return for the transactions without costs derived from market infrastructures, trading fees, or any other expenses, commissions associated with the transaction. Additionally, we have to mention that the netting is allowed when the same taxable person buys and sells the same securities, always that they are executed on the same day by the same taxpayer with the same settlement. This is also applicable to intraday transactions, of course. In the last paragraph, we refer to a crucial aspect: who will submit the reporting and pay the tax directly to the tax authorities. The answer is the Spanish Central Depository, Iberclear, or the taxpayer, but in the 99% of the cases, the Central Depository will be in charge of the direct reporting and payment to the tax authorities. The members of the Spanish Central Depository are obliged to submit their declarations via Iberclear, and if always that they are identified as taxpayers. However, underlying clients of Iberclear members, which are identified as taxpayers, will provide information for reporting and will pay the tax to the member of Iberclear, which is their provider of custody services. If we move over slide number 4, we will find a timeline to inform you exactly where we are in terms of regulation. On 15 October, as you may know, the Spanish Parliament approved the STT Act that was published on 16 October in the Official Gazette. As you can see in this slide, The entry into force will take place 3 months after the publishing. This is on January 16. At this stage, the tax authorities and the central depository, Everclear, are preparing the procedure that the central depository and the taxpayers will follow to assess the amount of tax that will be due, and in order to report as required by the tax authorities in the format that is pending of confirmation. This document is still a draft because it has not been finalized and approved yet, but it is expected it will be published in the coming days. This draft is under discussion by the tax authorities, Everclear, and the Spanish Banking Association. As part of this analysis, the central depository is requesting more time for IT adaptations. In this context, as a result of these conversations, Everclear communicated informally late on Friday a potential postponement of the reporting and payment of January and February obligations to April, together with March reporting. But this is still only an informal communication that must be confirmed by the tax authorities with the appropriate procedure. Additionally, the tax authorities will publish a guide to clarify all questions that have been transmitted by the financial sector, particularly BNP Paribas has sent a significant amount of questions to the Spanish Banking Association that are expected to be clarified in the coming days. This is all referred to legislation, so we can move to slide number 5 with my colleague James, please.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Very interesting, and thank you everybody for joining, and good afternoon to everybody. So as you've probably seen with Maria's excellent description, this financial transaction tax has an impact on virtually every single underlying client of BNP Paribas and many of the people who are connected to this call. Before we move into the flows to help you identify your role in this process, I'd just like to give you a quick reminder in terms of terminology. So the taxpayer, because I'm going to use these words a lot in the next few minutes, the taxpayer is the entity who, by definition, is closest in any chain of intermediaries to the actual acquirer, or the buyer of those securities. And they are the ones responsible for presenting and paying the tax. The taxable person is the actual acquirer or buyer of those securities, and the one who, for want of a better phrase, has to pay out of their own pocket this tax. Okay, so because we've got such a wide array of clients impacted, we've tried to focus on 3 main groups of client types and move into some examples of flows where each of those client types or group of client types is affected. So starting on slide 5, first of all, we take a look at financial intermediaries such as banks and broker-dealers. So the main impact for banks and broker-dealers, if we look on the left-hand side, so when that bank or that broker-dealer is the closest in that chain of intermediaries to the taxable person, the beneficiary, the final beneficiary, they've got certain responsibilities. They need to charge the tax. In the case of exempt transactions, they need to identify those exemptions and receive confirmation from the taxable person concerning the type of exemption, etc. They need to generate a declaration. They need, according to the law, to fund the payment of the tax in advance. They have joint responsibility with the taxable person for the accuracy of the data, the quality of the data that is provided, and they have an obligation to maintain records of those declarations for 10 years. Okay, so then if we move on to the right-hand side of the slide, we'll start looking at some simple examples which should be able to help the banks and broker-dealers determine their responsibilities. So the first simplest example is when the entity is trading proprietary business. So obviously, if it's proprietary business, the final beneficiary is the entity itself, so therefore they would be classified as the taxpayer and they have to generate and make the declaration. Slightly more complex, the second example, if you're internalising flow, so you're a systemic internaliser, then if you're closest to the acquirer, to the buyer, so you receive, to express it in another way, you are the entity that receives the order from the final beneficiary and you're internalising that trade on your books, then you, as the closest person, will be the one responsible for filing that tax, so therefore the taxpayer. There could be the case where you're internalising flow, so we'll look at a third example, where you're internalising flow, but you're internalising an order that comes from another broker, an international broker, for example, what many of you will know as a broker-to-broker trade. In that case, the broker from who you receive the order is not the final beneficiary. They are acting on behalf of either of the broker or the final beneficiary, and therefore, in this example that we give here, intermediary one or the international broker, in my example, would be the one defined as the taxpayer, not you as the internaliser. Then we look at the next example, again, a very simple example. You're receiving an order and not internalising the trade, you're routing the trade to a market, or you're trading on your own, either local membership or remote membership. But where you're, in this example, you receive the order directly from the buyer, therefore, obviously, you are the closest, and therefore, you are the one classified as the taxpayer. And the final example on this is exactly the same, but again, you're receiving an order from another broker, so it's a broker-to-broker trade. The other broker is the closest to the buyer, so therefore the intermediary one, the international broker, is the one classified as the taxpayer. If we move over to slide 6, then we can see here the case of impact for more custodian type clients. Okay, so in this case, again, as we've seen with the banks and broker dealers, probably the main impact would be as a taxpayer, very, very rarely as a taxable person, because they're holding and settling securities trades on behalf of their clients, but not trading. The responsibilities are exactly the same as for the banks and broker dealers, so I think we can move straight into the flows. So in the first example, which I think is the most common, the most popular type of transaction, is where the underlying client of the global custodian, let's say, sends an order to buy directly to a broker. We understand that in most cases, or in many cases at least, the custodian is not involved in the transmission of the order. If that is the case, then the broker who executes the trade would be classified as the taxpayer. The custodian doesn't need to do anything. If you are in the order transmission process, then you would be classified as the payer, as the taxpayer. In the second example, we see the same flow. In this case, there's a chain of intermediaries. For example, the global custodian is holding securities on behalf of another custodian who is not the final buyer. The final buyer is the client of the other custodian. However, the responsibilities does not go away from the broker, because the broker, even though there's that chain of intermediaries, the broker is the one receiving the order directly from the acquirer, from the buyer. Probably more impact for a custodian type client we will see in the next two examples, when there's a receipt of securities, the proceeds from a corporate action. And when there is no broker intervention, which is generally speaking the case, there isn't usually a broker intervention in the receipt of proceeds of corporate actions. So here you can see that if we receive on behalf of the global custodian securities belonging to the end investor, and there's no broker transmission, no broker intervention, then the custodian, the global custodian, is classified as the taxpayer and needs to make that declaration. And in the second case, this is another example of where there is a chain of intermediaries. The global custodian is the custodian of another custodian who is not the end investor, because the other custodian who is closer to the end investor, the second custodian, would be classified as the taxpayer, not the global custodian, in this example, BNP Paribas client. Okay. And then finally, slide 7, we look at more the group of clients such as asset managers, asset owners, and corporates. In the case of this group of clients, potentially the biggest impact is in terms of being the taxable person, not the taxpayer, as the final beneficiary of the securities. So the definition of taxable persons, we've given you some examples for asset managers, pension funds, and sovereign funds. The taxable person is the fund vehicle. For insurance companies, the insurer is the taxable person, and for supranational entities, the taxable person is the entity itself, the supranational entity. What is the responsibility of those taxable persons? Okay, so they are responsible for providing correct and accurate information to the taxpayers, the brokers, for example. They need to identify exemptions, the type of exemption applicable, any sort of calculation of netting, the tax base, etc., etc. All this information needs to be sent to the taxpayer. Of course, they've got joint liability with the taxpayer. And then finally, as your custodian, if we are your direct custodian, we would be the entity who would be defined as the taxpayer in all these cases. So going through a few examples, very simple example to begin with is, again, so the acquirer sends an order directly to the broker, BNP, the broker would be identified as the taxpayer because we, as BNP, as your custodian, is not involved in the transmission of that order. One thing important to note there is that some entities might not use one single broker. They might use multiple brokers. They might use 3 or 4 different brokers. If that is the case, they need to ensure that the correct information is provided to each one of those brokers as the tax-paying entity. Another example where asset managers, asset owners, and corporates might be impacted is in the case of a couple of specific trade types in Spain, which are pure OTC trades, which we call OTCS trades, and some types of ONE trades, OWNE, which is basically a trade which has an implicit change of registration, but in some cases there's not a change of beneficial owner. In other cases there is a change of beneficial owner. When there's a change of beneficial owner, the transaction is taxable. In that case, if you are the acquirer, so you are on the receiving end of one of these transactions, then BNP, being the closest and being your custodian to your entity, would be defined as the taxpayer. And again, when there is a corporate action with no broker intervention, then BNP, as your custodian, when you receive the proceeds from those corporate events, would be defined as your taxpayer. So I think that's more or less the end of the flows. Now I would like to pass over the mic to my friend and colleague, Sergio Gomez. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, James. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining. From this slide number 8 to the end of the presentation, we will focus on the service that we will offer to you, we will offer to your clients. What does it mean, this new law for BNP Paribas Securities Services? It's clearly stated on the law and also in the royal decree that is pending to be approved, that when you are a CSD participant or a client of a CSD participant, for example, having an account on a CSD participant, it will be mandatory to communicate and to go through Iberclear procedure for the declaration and payment of the FTT. Saying that, we will then offer to our clients a similar service as the ones we are already offering with the European FTTs, for example, with the French FTT and the payment to Euroclear France, where we will offer our clients a channel through our portal Neolink in order to communicate the declarations and to proceed with the payments to the CSD. We will not do any further reconciliation or calculation based, for example, on settlement. And the scope, to whom we will offer this channel service, we will be offering it to all of our Madrid local custody clients, and as well to all the global custody clients of BNP Paribas branches, including our GCS clients. Note that the service for LC clients outside of Spain, even though we are pending to receive, of course, each local CSD service description, our intention will be now to extend it as well to those clients, to those local custody clients of other branches. And before finishing this slide, I would like to mention that, and I think it has already been mentioned, but it's important to say that we are all working with draft documentation. The royal decree is not approved yet, so all the information is really as a draft and could be subject to changes. Actually, Iberclear published 2 weeks ago new documentation, and things are changing fast. If we move to the next slide number 9, regarding the declaration and payment flows, the general payment flows. First step, of course, will be once you have identified that you are subject to the tax, that you are considered as taxpayer, you should generate the declaration to be uploaded into our Neolink portal. Our deadline for receiving this file will be set 24 hours before Iberclear's deadline. Please note again that Iberclear has mentioned, for example, that the deadline will likely be the 10th natural day of the month, but the exact timing and hours are not yet published by the CSD and confirmed. We will do some format checks, some functional checks on the declaration you send, only format checks. We will replicate the same checks that Iberclear would do. If the checks are not passed, we will reject it, and you will have to send a new declaration. If the functional checks are passed, we will validate the files and immediately send them to Iberclear using the proprietary formats. In this case, one that is called ITF001, we will send it to Iberclear, and Iberclear will perform again the checks. We do not expect much rejection for Iberclear because, as I mentioned, we are going to replicate the same format checks that Iberclear will do. If we move to the next step, the tax payments, once we receive the acceptance confirmation from the declaration from Iberclear, we will debit your cash account. Again, if the file is rejected, we will inform you via Neolink acknowledgement so you can provide a new file. And the next and final step regarding the declaration and tax payment to the tax authorities, Iberclear will forward the validated declarations to the tax authorities. If rejected, something that again we will receive from a proprietary file of Iberclear called ITF002, we will inform you via Neolink. If it's accepted, we will process the tax authorities, and we will all follow the tax payment process. Iberclear deadline, as I mentioned before, is set right now on the 10th natural day of the month. If it's not a business day, the deadline will be the closest business day before the 10th. For example, if the 10th of the month is a Saturday, the deadline for Iberclear will be on Friday. If, for example, this Friday is a holiday, if it's a bank holiday, the deadline will be the 8th, for example. Then Iberclear 3 days later, after this deadline of the 10th, Iberclear will send us a payment notice to all of its participants, and 3 days later of this payment notice, it would charge us. Please note that Iberclear will charge us a total for all of our clients' declarations into our T2 accounts, and it will be, as I mentioned, 6 business days after the 10th day deadline. We, and as well Iberclear, recommend our clients to send one declaration per period. But of course, if any record is missing, you need to send a new records on several declarations, you can send us a complementary declaration, and we will of course as well treat it. Also, you can send what Iberclear call a substitutive declaration that makes reference to a previous declaration that will be cancelled and will be substituted with this new one. And what happens if any record is missing after the deadline or you did not send a monthly declaration? In this case, for late declaration, or what Iberclear calls out-of-date declarations, they can only be communicated as from the 20th natural day of the month, and will always implies penalties for late declaration. The penalties, the normal penalty regime of the tax authorities, that as we can see in the bottom of the slide, is depending on the months that you are late and depending on the amount pending to be paid. If it's 1 to 3 months, it will be 5%, 3 to 6 months, 10%, 6 to 12, 15, and above 12, 20% plus interest. Please note that all this flow for late declarations for the payment of the penalties will not go through the CSD and will be deal between the tax authorities and the taxpayer directly. And finally, if you have paid more in one declaration, and it's something that is actually have changed in this last documentation sent by Iberclear, you could include this and you could ask for a reclaim including these rectifications in the following month's declarations. This is something completely new that we will be issuing a client update informing all these changes from Iberclear compared to the initial client update that we've sent. If we then move to next slide number 10, here we will focus on the steps that our clients need to follow in order to be ready to declare and pay the Spanish FTT. First of all, we always mention, and I think Nigel James has already mentioned it, to seek for a fiscal advisor. It's very important to review internally the law and to analyze in which cases, for which acquisitions, for which activity flows, you are considered as taxpayer by the Spanish FTT law. Of course, analyze as well if any of those activities could fall under a tax exemption, and also how to determine the tax-based amounts and the net income capabilities. Regarding the exemptions, something important that I think, I know it happens also, for example, with the French FTT, exemptions has to be included in the declaration even though they will not generate a payment. If we move to the next step, and I would like to highlight this step very as well a lot, because it's something that is not happening in other FTTs. It will be necessary in Spain to get a tax ID, an individual identification code, to be able to proceed with the tax declaration. This field needs to be included in the declarations to be sent to the CSD, and if not included, it will be rejected. Usually resident clients have what we call an NIF, which is an individual tax ID, but non-resident clients, if not having one already, should ask for one individual identification code before proceeding with the declaration. If you are a direct participant of Iberclear, you can request it directly. If you are not a direct participant, upon your request, we can handle it, and we will be handling it via Iberclear on your behalf. Always, you could also handle it directly on the tax authorities' website. Iberclear, for example, has confirmed that we cannot send them this request until the end of January, but you can already send this to us. We will store them. We will store this request and be ready to send to the Iberclear on the 18th of January. Next step, developments. Of course, ensuring all records, acquisitions are included in the declarations. Do the developments to be able to provide the update of of the declarations into our Neolink portal, identify the exempt transactions, the reasons behind the exemptions, and provide the generation of the declaration. And the final step, subscribe the service for the declaration and payment with us, which include new contract clause, new SLD annex describing this new service, new pricing, and the subscription to our Neolink module. If you already have Neolink, you will have any way to subscribe with ourselves in order for us to give you access to this Spanish FTT module and provide us with the users you want to have access to. And if you do not have Neolink, you will have to subscribe completely the Neolink services from us. If we move to slide number 11, the next slide, in these two next slides, we will focus again on the flows we explained in general in slide 9, but specifically for our local custody clients for slide 11 and for our global custody and GCS clients on slide 12. As you can see in the slide, we have two different flows. The first one for the individual identification code request, and the second flow in the bottom for the declaration flow. For local custody clients, the client should request via the email address we have included in the client update to us. Once we receive this request, we will forward it to Iberclear, as I mentioned, from the 18th of January, and they will request this to the tax authorities. Once this IIC code is assigned, we will receive it from the CSD, and we will forward it, and we will confirm to you this number so you can include it in all your declarations. The declarations file flows is what I mentioned. Via the Neolink, the declarations should be uploaded. We will do the checks. If all the checks are passed, we will send it to Iberclear. Once Iberclear sends us the confirmation, we will debit your cash account. Iberclear will send the declaration to the tax authorities, and if any rejections coming from us, coming from Iberclear, coming from the tax authority happens, we will forward it to you. You will be able to see it in the Neolink acknowledgement. Please note that I would like to mention here, because I think I didn't mention it, that the declaration at the moment should be done per taxpayer. So you cannot for the moment include acquisitions, transactions from different taxpayers in one only declaration, because the declaration is per taxpayer and the taxpayer is identified with this tax ID number. And finally, if we move to slide number 12, for the global custody and the GCS clients in Madrid and in other locations, the IC client request changed in the sense that the request should go to each of your local branch, to your client services representative, that will send it to us. We will send it to Iberclear and Iberclear to the tax authorities. Once we receive the confirmation from the Iberclear that we have this code assigned, we will send it from Madrid to each branch, and you will get the confirmation from your client services team. For the declaration file flows, it will not change in the sense that you, as global custody clients of any of our branches, and as I mentioned, as a local custody client, you will have access to this Neolink of the Spanish FTT once you subscribe to the service. If all the checks are passed and there is no reaction, we will send it to Iberclear to the tax authorities, and if in the flow there is any rejection, we will let you know via the Neolink acknowledge. So these are the main flows, and I think we're finished with the slides. I handle to James, so.
Okay, so just a few words before we hand over to the questions. I think what's clear, I hope we've made clear during the presentation, is that really time is of the essence. We've got a bit of breathing space thanks to our advocacy in the market by achieving that delay in reporting, not of implementation, don't forget, but of reporting until April. But still, even so, we've got a lot to work on before then. The deadlines are very tight. and I think that we need to have a very collaborative, a very proactive approach to this process leading up to implementation. And again, not only collaborative and proactive, but as we've pointed out on a couple of occasions during the presentation, the law, the procedures are not 100% closed yet, and so we need to be flexible in our approach as well. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Nigel, who I believe has received some questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James, and hello again to everybody. Brief thank you, of course, to our expert speakers, both for an expert technical but also very practical insight into the Spanish FTT. Fair to say we've had a lot of interest and a lot of questions from participants today. We'll try and get through as many as we can, and apologies if we don't get through all of those on the webinar today, but we will try and come back to you afterwards if we haven't done so today. But if you still want to submit a question, please do so in the box provided. But with that, given we've got a lot of questions to get through, maybe I'll just ask my colleagues the first question, which is, you mentioned that for local custody clients out of Spain, the service offer is being reviewed and also pending for other CSDs information. But are you planning to offer it to us and be able to upload it in Neolink as well?
Yes, thank you. Actually, thank you for the question, because it was, as written in the slide 8, it's true that from other CSD, we are pending to really receive each local CSD service description. But the answer is yes. Actually, we are taking into account that the CSD may not be ready. So we will just be offering to our LC clients of other locations to have access to the Spanish FTT, so they can include the declarations through Iberclear. And then I will also say that we are actually planning to issue a client update very soon. I don't know if it today or tomorrow, also to include the ICC request that will be and the procedure to include this not only for global custody clients and of course the local custody clients in Madrid, but also for the local custody of other branches. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Our next question is, since the FTT rules are not yet confirmed, what are the expected provisions as of 16th of January 2021?
Thanks for the question. We have to say that it is right that we have not a clear view on the procedure that all taxpayers have to follow to perform the first reporting in February or April. If finally we have a confirmation on the postponement, the procedure is developing the law is right now under discussion, and even if we have a draft, there are some open points that can change. Right now, we can focus on this draft if we are considered taxpayers, which report directly to the tax authorities. But if we have an account with a member of the central depository in BP2S Spain, we will be able to use BP2S, the Iberclear, and the tax authorities. For that, we will have to wait for instructions from Iberclear and from the member of Iberclear to send the correct information in the format that is necessary according to Iberclear requirements. But we'll have to wait to have a more clear view from the tax authorities.
Thanks very much for that. Maybe I can just link a couple of questions together. Next question: do we have to report details of the beneficial owners, and which trades are we concerned with? Are those the ones with trade date 16th of January, or is it 16th of January settlement date?
Okay, I will answer those. Regarding the first question, the details of the beneficial owners, the answer would be no. It's not required, and there is no field at the moment on the declarations in order to identify anything about the final taxable person. Mainly the fields that are included correspond to the identification of the taxpayer, so the person liable to declare and pay the tax in substitution of the taxable person. And second question, trades which has concerned the dependent trade date of value date. Our interpretation, and it's clear what the law mentioned right now in the accrual of the tax is that the accrual of the tax is placed on the moment that the registration on the account of the final beneficiary takes place. That for us it will be the 16th, or when the transaction, the acquisition settles on the 16th. So it will not be trade date, but more close to value date, or as I mentioned, actually the law mentioned that it will be in the moment that the acquisition is registered in an account for the final acquirer.
Okay. Thank you very much. What are the envisaged requirements in respect of Spanish securities traded outside of Spain, but not on a UK exchange? The mechanism being established for paying the tax is the Spanish security, BNP Iberclear, but a system such as Crest will not be responsible for collecting the tax. Is it the case that whatever we include in the file to BNP will be paid to Iberclear? Will there be scope for currency conversion? So quite a long, complex question there, but.
Yes, thank you, Nigel. Spanish assets traded in other markets are subject to the FTT. As mentioned by Maria, it would be the issuing principle, the ones that applies. It no matter where the acquisition takes place, where the market where it's traded, it will be applicable. In case Crest has no agreement in place with Iberclear to manage the FTT, which is something that the law mentioned, that in case of acquisitions registered outside of Spain, the CSD could do an ad hoc agreement with other CSDs in order to be able to their participants to offer the tax. If this does not happen, you can always manage directly to the tax authorities as well. And in case you are one of our clients of Madrid, of other locations, as I mentioned in my first answers to the first question, you can subscribe as well your service and communicate it through us, and always through Iberclear procedure. We will send it, we will give you access to the Spanish FTT, and we will send it to Iberclear. In case of Forex to be applied, and the declaration sent to Iberclear will be always in euros. So in case of Forex to be applied, we are considering that you will have to use and will correspond to the Forex rate of the European Central Bank the day prior to the settlement date. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Next question: is BNP going to share the reports that have been made? What is the frequency? What is the format of these reports?
As described in the flows, you will have access to Neolink, where you could find the detail of the declarations you've sent, also the details of the declaration of status in the acknowledgement of each declaration. So you will be also able to see if it has been accepted or if it's rejected, and you need to send a new declaration. This will be acknowledged, and this will be visible in Neolink as soon as it is processed by us, Iberclear, and the tax authorities. As soon as we receive anything from any of this, we will forward. You will be able to see it in Neolink.
Thank you. And the next question is it possible to use BNP for the Spanish FTT declaration and payment, even though we don't use BNP for Spain, but we do use BNP for other countries?
Okay, so yes, that is possible. So for clients who are not direct, don't have a direct relationship with the Spanish branch, would need to go through the branch where they have a relationship and the branch would subscribe to the service and we would receive the information from the branch. So I guess the underlying answer is contact your client service manager in the branch where you hold an account.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. And the linked question, actually, if I may, in terms of what is the expected Spanish FTT file format, please?
Okay, the expected FTT file format will be exactly the format itself. It has two steps. It has a header which includes information for the taxpayer, and the second part of the file is exactly based on Iberclear format. So it will be the same fields that Iberclear will require from us.
Okay, and what do I need to sign in order to receive the BNP Paribas Spanish FTT services?
As we have commented during slide 10, in order to subscribe our services, you need to contact us to subscribe the service, which includes repapering of contracts. Will include a new clause, a new annex in the contract in order to include the FTT, and as well an annex for the SLD where we describe the service we will offer to you. As I mentioned, if not having Neolink, you will have to subscribe the whole Neolink package. And if you already have the Neolink, you at least will have to tell us that you need to have access to the Spanish FTT and provide us with the users you will require to have access. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And the questions continue to pour in, as it were. Can we submit two files and payments, one for each entity at our end?
Yes. Iberclear recommends, and we had a conference call with them, the first conference call they did, the first webinar they did, they recommend to send one-only declarations. But as I mentioned, of course, if you missed any record, you can send us what it's called a complementary declaration, and we will send, of course, all of them to Iberclear, and they will be treating them. You can also send, as I said, if there's a whole mistake with one of the declarations, you can send a substitutive declaration. You make reference in one of the fields to the previous one you want to cancel, and this will be cancelled and will be completely replaced by a new one. But again, for missing records, for any additional records, if you don't want to send only one, you can send complementary declarations as well.
Great, thank you very much. And I know I mentioned in my introduction about the French FTT. So we've had a question about what lessons have been learned from the implementation for the French FTT that will be different to the Spanish FTT from a BNP perspective, and if you could advise for different types of clients, please.
Yes, of course. As having already a service in place for the French FTT, and we will be offering a similar service, we are harmonizing our service as much as possible in order to be able to fit as much as possible with what we do with the French FTT. As I mentioned, of course, file formats are different. We have to stick with the CSD request. And there is also some difference on the fields that should be included, because I know that the Iberclear is probably asking more fields than, for example, the French authorities are requesting. And again, we have, and I like the question because I want to highlight again the fact that you need to ask to request this tax ID. That is something that do not happen, for example, from our experience in French and in other European FTTs. And this is very important, because if you do not request this tax ID, which is a field on the declaration, this declaration will be cancelled, and you will not be able to proceed with your obligations towards the FTT.
Okay, thank you for that. And if I already have Neolink to send the French FTT, do I need to subscribe for Neolink access again?
Yes, it's already, as mentioned, if you already have Neolink, yes, we need to know that you subscribe to the service, that you need to subscribe to this new It's not a model to this new access of the Spanish FTT. So as soon as you subscribe to it, you could have access to the Spanish FTT module. So yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. And another question. Would you always be the taxpayer as my custodian for all the corporate actions subject to the tax?
So, you repeat, Nigel?
Would BNP always be the taxpayer as my custodian for the corporate actions subject to the tax?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think, as I explained in one of the flows on the global custodian page, where the global custodian is acting on behalf of another financial institution, another intermediary, then the intermediary would be defined as the taxpayer.
Okay, thank you. And
it would go all the way to global custodian.
It would depends really on the type of the customer you are. In case you are a credit institution or an ISP or an ISP, we will not be the taxpayer, as you will be the taxpayer. It's clearly stated in the rule that, and I think it's something different to the thing that it happens in France. The law clearly states that when you are an ISP or a credit institution acting prop, you will be the taxpayer. So, however, for asset owners, asset managers, and corporate funds that are not ISP or credit institutions, we will be the taxpayer, calculating and paying the tax authorities for the corporate actions subject to the tax.
okay, and thank you. And another question just come in. Can the FTT be paid on a transaction by transaction basis, or is it always on a monthly basis?
It would be only on a monthly basis, and before the 10th natural day of the following month, you will have to include all the acquisitions subject to the tax. So as mentioned also in the question before, you can send as many complementary declarations as you want, but you cannot send. You should send. We recommend to send one only declaration per month, including all the acquisitions, and this should be done 24 hours to us before the market deadline.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of the time, and I know there were still quite a few more questions that have come through. But as I said, I think we will happily answer those questions after this call. So it just remains for me to once again thank our superb experts from BNP Paribas for their insights into the Spanish FTT. Thank you, of course, to all those of you who have joined today. We very much appreciate you participating in our webinar, and will, of course, welcome any feedback that you may have afterwards. And we very much look forward to welcoming you to a future webinar. Thank you very much, and hope you have a great day.